Okay, we are live. Hello, everybody. My name is Bob Boros, and we're on my YouTube Jazz Dance video channel. And the name of the channel is My Jazz and Tap Dance Life. And one thing I've just started, along with the instructional videos that I have put out there, and also choreography videos, are starting to do some live interviews of people who are important in the world of jazz dance and trying to get as much information out there on topics that are of interest to a lot of people. And these are things that really aren't kind of found in a lot of the dance media, whether it's magazines or blogs, things like that. So today I'm going to be speaking with Patty Karagozian, who is in Paris, France, and she's a longtime jazz dance artist working there, although originally from America. So she's going to give us an idea on a certification program for jazz dance teachers that the French government has sponsored and is very strongly behind. And that's something we don't have in our country here at all. So this should be a pretty interesting thing. First of all, let me make a quick thing about my channel. It still continues to grow. We're at just about 1,800 subscribers, and we're adding, I think it was 175 subscribers in the last 2 weeks alone. So that's amazing. So I just want to thank you for showing an interest, subscribing. If you are a subscriber, remember to click that notifications bell so you get an automatic notification of every time that we put up a new video. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to pull Patty into the broadcast issue, and here she is. Okay, hi,
Hello.
Patty. Hi.
Hello there.
Okay, welcome to my Jazz and Tap Dance Life.
Oh, I'm honored and happy to be here.
Great. All right, so you are in Paris, France.
That's right.
But you started out, you originally from America. So
That's right.
before we go into the details of this certification process, why don't you tell me a little bit about like what's your history in jazz dance? How did you start dancing? How did you find your way to Paris? And what is it that you're doing there?
Okay. Well, let's see. I'll try to make this short. Well, I was born in a family where there was dance and music and literature and painting, and I'm a very lucky person. I've
Hmm.
always been at the right place at the right time. And we moved to Pittsburgh when I was 11 or 12, and I got more involved into dancing. And it just so happened that I was there when a certain person arrived in Pittsburgh whose name was Nicholas Petrov, who was the
Hmm.
person who founded Pittsburgh Ballet Theater.
Okay.
And he was looking for dancers, and there I was. And of course, now here we're talking about ballet dancing, but Nicholas was it was very important to him for his dancers to have a full training, jazz, ballet, modern, Graham, and he brought in different teachers for jazz.
Hmm.
My first teacher was his wife, Marion Petrov, who gave jazz classes. At the time, I didn't realize it, but she was giving us a Dunham bar.
Okay.
Marion had danced with Peter Gennaro.
Hmm. Right, right.
And so, that's kind of logical. And he also brought in Valerie Camille, who
Hmm.
had been formed by Jack Cole,
Jack
and
Cole.
also Kaniko Nari, who at the time was one of Luigi's assistants.
Wow.
So early on, I got very mixed education in jazz dance.
Yeah, but a very strong education and very strong techniques.
So I performed with Pittsburgh Ballet Theater. So I'm almost always kind of afraid to say it. It's hard to believe, but I was a ballet dancer. But in the summers when the company was off season, I would often do musicals with the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera. I did 3 seasons with them. And then at one point in my life, I kind of needed to go elsewhere. So I wondered, should I go to New York? Should I go to Europe? And I decided to go to Europe. And what happened there is that I met the man I married, and so therefore I stayed and founded a
Mhm.
family. And so I got, as I had a child and everything, I got more involved in teaching than in,
Mhm.
performing. So to make a long story short, I was teaching all different levels. I had absolutely no idea of a teaching method. I just did it, because
Mhm.
I was asked to do it. And in 1989, I had been teaching for a while. A law was passed in France that imposed a certification to qualify people to teach ballet, jazz, or contemporary dance. And it became illegal to teach these three disciplines without having this certification.
And this
And
was
I
in
got involved in that.
1989. This was
Yes,
1989.
that's
Okay.
right.
Wow. Wow. And so from there, how long did it take for this to develop where it was actually in focus?
Well, actually, there had been a lot of discussion and going on before the law was passed. Just didn't fall out of the sky. But
Mhm.
and then after that, of course, once the law was passed, there had to be centers that would propose a program of instructing young dancers to become teachers to train them. And of course, this was developed. And so today, what we have in France now is a system where you can go into a center and sign up and go through the process. And at the end, achieve this diploma, which will permit you to teach legally.
Okay.
The reason for this at the time was mostly for the protection of children and of adults and teenagers, of people that took dance, because when dancing is badly taught, it can be very dangerous. It can
Mhm.
really hurt. You can have accidents. You can have arthritis at an early age. Lots of problems because of a bad teacher.
Mhm.
Our bodies are our instruments, and
Mhm.
the instrument has to be well treated.
Right. Was there any resistance by anyone? Suppose somebody is a well-accomplished dancer, and
Mm-hmm.
they say, I know how to teach, I have this background with me, but I don't particularly want to go through the process that you are prescribing because I might be going in a different direction. So is there any resistance to having like one sort of particular curriculum that's put on top of this certification process to be a teacher? Or do people just say, all right, no, that's fine, I will just learn this process and then after that go my own direction?
Oh, I'm sure that there's resistance, from different people, and that happened at the time. The biggest resistance that has happened, I would say, is that in more recent years, the question came up with hip hop, because hip
Mhm.
hop was being taught all over the place, and in hip hop we do kind of acrobatic stuff, and
Mhm.
should hip hop also enter into this system where to teach hip hop you had to have this certification, and it became very complicated because many artists from the hip hop discipline, they were afraid of the system would tighten up
Mhm.
around certain models and not give a certain freedom, to leave this freedom. And of course, it's an urban expression. And so this is one thing that the government is working on,
Mhm.
is how to include other dances now in this
Right.
system
Right. Okay.
without everything becoming so formalized that there's no diversity and there's no liberty of creation,
Mhm.
etc.
Okay. All right. So let's get into the jazz dance aspect of this. So
Yeah.
can you give me an idea of what is like sort of the overall framework? What is it that the aspiring teacher has to study? What do they have to master? What are the different areas that they're going to receive information?
Okay. Well, the first thing they have to do is they have to pass a technical exam, which consists of dancing an imposed variation, then a variation of their own choreography, and then there's also an improvisation, and it's the jury. The jury is composed of three people. The jury will choose the music and the theme of this short improvisation, which if I remember correctly, it's a minute and a half long.
Hmm.
And then there's a very, very short discussion. It's not really a very formal interview, but a few questions may be asked by the jury. And then once that the dancer achieves this test, that permits them to enter into the program. It's an entrance test,
Hmm.
actually, like an audition, and that permits them to enter into the program. And the first year, they're going to have to pass tests in dance history, anatomy, and music, so that they get all this theoretical background to help them to get on to the next year, the last year. In the last year, they're going to have dance pedagogy, how to teach, learning how to teach for adults, for technical classes. They also have teaching very young children, children that are from 4 to 7 years old, before they get into real technical work. And also, one thing that is very important that was developed here in France, especially for this certification program, it's what the French call analyse du corps analyse fonctionnelle du corps dans le mouvement dansé. And that translates to functional analysis of the body in dance movement.
I see.
And this is a combination of anatomy, movement analysis, and other disciplines. And the reason that this exists is to permit the dancer to see the bodies of her students and to give good corrections, to know how to correct, and to conceive exercises that are going to be beneficial to their body and not hurt them.
Okay. All right. I'm going to backtrack really quick. Now, when they
Yeah.
go for this technique audition, as you were saying, is there an age limit for that? They have to be a certain age before they can
It used to be that
present themselves?
they could even do it as I remember as a member of a jury to sing teenagers, but today now they have to be 18. They have to be 18.
And when they receive this additional instruction in pedagogy, history, other areas, are those sort of like self-study things that they're going to take on?
Oh
Or
no,
are
they have
regular...
classes. They have classes. Yes, with a certain number of hours.
I see. And so they have to be living in a certain location. There's a certain center that will give these instructions.
There's several centers all over France. There's several in Paris, Montpellier, Marseille, Aix-en-Provence, Lille, Toulouse, Bordeaux, Nantes. So it's pretty well geographically spread out.
Right. And how long normally would it take someone to go through this process of when they started and to eventually where they receive their certification?
Well, once they have the exam, the technical exam, it's 2 years. It's 2 years. And but quite often they'll go into a dance center and they might do a couple of years before passing their a technical exam, because depending on where they were learning to dance beforehand, they might not have a high enough level, which is most often this is the case. So they need to work on their technique for a few years before trying out this technical exam.
Okay. Now, in your estimation, or even I'm sure from talking to people and in estimation of other people, do you think that this program has really served to raise up the level of jazz dance and how it's taught and how it's perceived in France?
Well, I think it's been very beneficial to the teaching of jazz dance. I remember taking jazz classes before this, and quite often it was the teacher in front of the mirror with the students behind them showing, but not really with the capacity of explaining, and everybody just kind of learning it like that. And this program brings you to analyze what you're doing, what your own exercises or what your own combination is, to be able to really explain it, to transmit it in a very, in a certain quality, to have a quality of transmission. And also to be able to have the feedback when you watch your students doing the exercise that you propose, to see what's going wrong, what do I need to correct, and how can I correct it? So, I think it really has improved teaching, jazz teaching.
Okay. All right. It certainly probably has removed whatever the lower level of teaching, which was the idea. We don't want to injure young people as they're beginning their dance training. So that kind of really just eliminates that possibility.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
Okay. All right. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull in a video of one of the variations that would have
Mm-hmm.
to learn. And so this is for a very young dancer. So we can play this, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what is going on here.
Okay, very good.
All right, and let me give it a start. There we go.
Okay, now this variation is not for the teaching program.
Mm-hmm.
What this is for is this is for the conservatories, for the French conservatories.
I see.
Now they have basically three levels. They have the first cycle, the second cycle, and the third cycle. The first cycle being kind of the débutant, the beginning. Second cycle is intermediate, and the third cycle is advanced. And so this is would be for a child who would be probably around 10 or 11 years old, having already done her 3 first years of jazz dance. And this, exam, obtaining this exam permits this child to go into the intermediate level. And this variation is composed by Magali Cozzolino, and I think she did a fabulous job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, this is remarkable. And as we were talking a little bit before, this style of jazz, or this approach, or this level of mastery within the body is something personally I would not think that we would see here in the United States.
Mm-hmm,
The approach to jazz dance is not the same. Here we would
mm-hmm,
have something a little bit more presentational,
mm-hmm.
a little bit more selling in terms of what the
Yeah,
body is
yeah.
doing,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly a little bit more direction towards what people call the tricks. There would be a lot more turns, there would be a lot more leaps, there would be
Yeah,
more of
more
that sort
acrobatic.
of
Yeah.
thing that we would see here. So this is a
Mm-hmm,
different.
mm-hmm.
Now let's go to another one. I'm going to pull this one off, and we are going to go to another one. Now, maybe again, this is the same thing in terms of. Let me see if this is the one that I want. Yes, it is. Okay. Now, is this the same thing? Is this an entrance to
No.
a conservatory?
Now this is for the conservatories. It would be the final exam for the third cycle, for
Mm-hmm.
the last year of an advanced class, and it's also the variation that is used for the exam to go into the teaching program.
Mm-hmm.
What the French call the EAT, Examen d'aptitude technique. And so this variation was choreographed by Geraldine Armstrong, and it's an example of what we esteem that a jazz dancer should be able to perform before going into the teaching program.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that? I mean, this certainly is. It's a very accomplished variation that this dancer is performing. So, somebody wants to go into teaching. Does this kind of push the program into accepting younger dancers? I mean, if somebody was, say, 55 years old and said, "I want to become a jazz dancer," would they be able to handle something like this successfully to be able to pass this?
Well, I believe that in what was written about this exam, as far as the legality goes, that somebody who is
Mm-hmm.
over 40 can mark. They don't have to do everything full out.
Mm-hmm. I
So,
see.
yeah. And I have seen that,
Okay.
that has happened. Every once in a while, we do get somebody who's over 40 years old that is
Mm-hmm.
passing this exam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because that would always be an issue of trying to be inclusive of as
Yes,
many different types of people as possible in
exactly.
terms of their interests, but still
Mm-hmm.
somehow trying to maintain your standard, which is the
Yeah.
reason this came into existence anyway. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but this is a very strong uh, example of jazz dance, and a little bit
Mm-hmm.
different than what we would see here in the United States. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
all
Mm-hmm.
right, let's pop her off there. Okay, and come back. All right. Um, so I don't know if you know the answer to this, but are there other programs in other countries throughout Europe that would have the same idea, or is this a program that's really we only see in France?
I'm sure that in other countries that they do have some kind of teacher training programs in universities or elsewhere, or
Hmm.
maybe in private schools. But as far as I know, France is the only country where there is a law,
Hmm.
where there's a law about the legality of teaching dance
Hmm.
in jazz, ballet, and contemporary.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, like all laws, that always creates ways to get around it. And you talked about the fact that these variations are difficult. So somebody who doesn't have the level, instead of calling what they're doing jazz dance, they give it
Hmm.
another name and they teach anyway.
I see.
There's
Right.
always ways to getting around the law,
Hmm.
unfortunately.
I
So
see.
the problem hasn't been totally solved. You know, you can't prevent people from driving a car without a license. A lot of
Hmm.
people do it,
Right.
but I think, yeah, for the most part, it has been a very, very
Hmm.
beneficial thing.
Right. So I can also see that I mean, it helps in the term of jazz dance because that's what your certification is, but maybe not a particular style within jazz dance. Because I can remember studying with mathematics, and
Mm-hmm.
he would moan sometimes about, oh yes, a teacher comes to my 7-day workshop, they take all 7 classes, and they just go home and they put up their sign that says, I teach mathematics technique,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
obviously they don't know that. So that
absolutely.
that still would not solve that problem.
Right.
They could
Mm-hmm.
say, I teach
Yeah.
this, but in terms of the word jazz dance, now in terms, if
Mm-hmm.
somebody suppose they did teach, say, I teach jazz dance, and they have not
Mm-hmm.
received the certification. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how are they policed? How does someone come to
Not
know this,
enough.
and what happens?
Unfortunately, this is something that, the police have other stuff to do than check out dance schools, unfortunately. So a lot
Hmm.
of people do get away with teaching illegally. A lot
Wow,
of people do,
wow.
unfortunately. However, um, generally speaking, in the conservatories, which depend on the town or on the region and are sponsored by, taxpayers' money,
Hmm.
they will usually be very careful to be sure that their dance teachers do have this diploma.
I see. Okay. All right. I'm going to try to pull in one more, and I hope I'm getting the right one here. Because, nope, that's not the one I want. Okay, let's give it another try. And because all of the URLs are in French, so uh,
Oh, that doesn't make it
uh,
easy. Yeah.
the one that's yours, is that number
Yes.
20 or 21? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think it would be 20.
20. Okay.
I think. Give it a try. I think
Yeah.
that's what it would be.
Yeah, that's the right one.
Yes, this is it. Okay.
Okay. All right. Now, this is your variation for the certification.
That's right. That's right. And actually, it was inspired by a piece that I did for my company, which
Hmm.
is based on a series of poems. And this poem is about a seabird. And actually, it's a duo. There's another dancer on stage in the piece who is
Hmm.
trying to catch this bird.
Hmm.
And so this is the variation for the year 2019.
Hmm.
And my son composed the music, which is a
Oh,
music
wonderful.
measures of 5 time, 5 beat measure.
Hmm.
And so there you are. So this is quite different because it's a little more narrative. You
Hmm.
can see the movements that kind of describe a bird.
Hmm. And are there any particular movement qualities in that you're looking for in terms of the certification? Because I mean, this takes a very adept performer to be able to pull off, the
Mm,
difference between the sharper and the slower movements, the more controlled and nuanced
yes.
movements.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes, I think personally that the capacity to go into dynamic contrasts and
Hmm.
go just from slow to fast to being totally immobile,
Hmm.
silence. That's all part of jazz music and jazz dance. And
Hmm.
So, and this is also one thing that I think that where we could really improve our choreography is that there's sometimes a tendency to always be contained in the measure, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and being very symmetrical and not getting into a phrasing where it might be very rapid and then suddenly slow down and suspend. And
Mm-hmm.
so these are kind of the qualities that, and then,
Yeah.
and yet you see in here, you just did a barrel turn. You can identify the basic steps that are all part of the jazz
Mm-hmm.
vocabulary.
Yeah, I mean, particularly from what you're doing here, there's a particular approach that you have, and it has the lyrical aspect and
Mm.
I'm gonna say contemporary, but there still is the sharpness and that impulse of jazz
Yes,
that you wouldn't
yes.
see in a lot of contemporary. So
Mm-hmm,
it's like it's out on the outer edge of what we know as jazz dance. We're not dancing to
mm-hmm.
swing music, we're not doing vernacular
Yes,
steps, but it's
yeah.
still maintaining some of that quality
Mm-hmm,
of what are the characteristics of jazz dance where it started
mm-hmm,
from.
mm-hmm,
Wonderful. Okay. All right. So that's an amazing thing that is happening in France, and
mm-hmm,
I don't know if anything like that would ever happen in the United States.
mm-hmm.
Um, we do have a group called NDEO, which is National Dance Educators Organization, and they have
Yes.
many prescriptions as what teaching is. I don't know
Mm-hmm,
much about it, but I don't know if they have anything for jazz dance. We do have some
mm,
teacher organizations, which used to be more
mm-hmm.
popular, but you probably remember there was the Dance Educators of America, the Dance
Yes, I remember
Masters of
hearing about that.
America, and
Yes,
they would
Dance
have
Masters
their
America.
own certifications in jazz dance, and there's particular people
Uh-huh,
who would make up the curriculum. So if you
uh-huh.
became, say, was a DMA certified teacher, you would
Mm-hmm.
learn that particular curriculum, and then you could
Right.
teach that. So that was another way of just maintaining the quality, as opposed
Yes.
to, because I've certainly seen my share of people who say they're teaching jazz dance, and well,
Oh
it's
boy.
stretch a little bit here and stretch a little bit there, and
Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
music pumping, and then we go
Yeah.
to town and we dance real hard. That's sort of,
Yeah.
so this is a
Yeah.
it's a whole different thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more while we have a little bit more time, because
Mm-hmm.
you are a very active choreographer, as well as teacher in France. So you're working with your company right now. So why don't you talk a little bit about what is your company, and maybe what is your idea or your approach to dancing and jazz dance?
Well, I had the opportunity to create this company in 2011. It was when I administratively created the company
Mm-hmm.
PGK. And our first performance, our first creation was in March of 2012. And it was the piece that this excerpt comes from. And, my major objective was to show and to prove that jazz dance can be poetic, it
Mm-hmm.
can be sensitive, it can be deep, it can be human. And of course, one thing that was the very first thing, my first decision was that it would be with music live.
Mm-hmm.
So, having a son who's a pianist and a composer, it's
Great.
real practical. And it was
Mm-hmm.
fantastic because we really worked together. Before the dancers came to rehearse, we worked together on music, on the
Mm-hmm.
different parts of the piece. And, and just the fact to have musicians on stage, it changes everything. There's a relationship that's created between the musicians and the dancers, even if they're standing by their instruments, not necessarily always in the space, but
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, it's just magic.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that's great about this piece, the last time we performed it was last summer. Yes, July 2018. That's right. And it's never quite the same because there are moments of improvisation. Also, I wanted my dancers to really be involved in the creation itself and not just learn the steps from me, but
Mm-hmm.
create their own phrases. And then I would put it on stage and in space. And it's like uh, a jazz band where
Mm-hmm.
everybody has their part to play
Mm-hmm.
in the creation itself, and they're just not there, obeying a score.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, this is a little promo from your company, so let's get
Hmm.
that going, and you can talk a little bit about. In fact, I'll put it up to full screen.
Okay, unfinished fragments. Um, my older sister was a poetess. I say was because she died very young.
Mm,
And I used some of her poetry to inspire this piece in different, there's a suite of different dances. And here's
mm-hmm,
the Seabird dance with
mm-hmm.
Emmanuel Duke, who is a magnifique dancer, and Valene Ruizy. Both of these girls are fantastic. And they are also wonderful teachers. And I think also that they are future jazz choreographers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, what is
Uh,
it like with the collaboration with musicians? I know maybe it's a little bit different because your son is involved with that.
yeah,
But sometimes, like I'll know from working in a university, the jazz
yes,
musicians are into their jazz playing, and to
yeah.
sometimes to collaborate with dancers, they kind of feel, well, I'm not doing my thing. I'm just playing for them to
Oh,
dance. Have you
mm-hmm.
ever experienced anything like that with musicians?
Not with these musicians here.
Hmm.
They've always been very, very happy to rehearse and to perform. Um, but some of them had already had experienced accompanying
Hmm.
dance companies. I
Hmm.
believe it was the drummer. Yes, I think he's worked with a hip hop company.
Hmm.
And no, I never. They were all very excited about
Good.
this creation, and
Now, have you had any formal training as a choreographer, or did you just sort of dive into it on your own and find your own way?
not really any formal training. Well, I've had a few composition classes, sometime in different workshops.
Hmm.
But I did get into when I got into this diploma program as a instructor. I got very involved in workshops of improvisation and composition,
Hmm.
and this is one good thing about the program that it has brought improvisation back into jazz dance,
Hmm.
where historically it disappeared for a long time,
Absolutely.
and
Hmm.
that really makes the difference, I think. And the
Hmm.
dancers are really involved because they're doing more than just executing what the choreographer wants to see.
Okay. And what is sort of the future for the company? Is there interest in people? Do they want to see this? Can you get bookings to go to different areas?
It's
Is it,
really hard. It's
yeah,
really hard.
normally that's it.
Right now, we're in kind of a period where it's not very active, but
Hmm.
I'm sure it's going to get back there. But most jazz companies are not helped by the government,
Hmm.
and I'm not saying it's the government's fault, but what happened historically actually is that to go back a little bit in dance history in France, of course, up until the 50s and 60s, la danse française, French dance, was the opera,
Hmm.
Paris opera,
Sure.
classical ballet. Then in the 50s and 60s, you see modern dancers starting to emerge, modern dancers and modern choreographers and modern teachers. And then in the 80s, when Francois Mitterrand was president, and the minister of culture at that time was a man named Jacques Lang, and he did wonderful things for dance, but for contemporary dance. And
Hmm.
so many young companies and choreographs were emerging at that time and doing very, very creative work. It was great work. I'm not, I would not say the contrary. But what happened is that set a certain criteria. And the
Hmm.
criteria was more oriented toward contemporary dance. And jazz dance was kind of left to the side because at the same period, there were a lot of jazz companies.
Hmm.
Break Odoms, Jenny Noringet. Matt had a company that was later on was taken over by Reza Ahmadi. There were a lot of choreographers that were producing creations and that had great dancers. but it was really very, very difficult for them to get recognition from the government, who gives, of course, subsidizes and sponsors and gives financial aid to companies.
Now, are there new people who are coming up who are trying to work in jazz dance? Like where are the new jazz dance choreographers?
Um, that's hard for me to say. I think maybe in the dancers that are in some of these companies, they're gonna.
Hmm.
I'm hoping
Hmm.
that the seed will be planted, and that they'll later on be creating their own companies.
Hmm.
And interesting enough, you know, the teaching program, you'd think, okay, then the person means that that person who's going into the teaching program is renouncing the stage, and they're going to go teach in the studio, and that's going to be
Hmm.
their life. But sometimes they say, well, this training session that gives me the desire to choreograph.
Hmm.
So, there's kind of uh, you know, uh, nothing is in a straight line. We put
Hmm.
it that way.
So if something's going to happen in the future, it's still going to come from somebody who just says, look, I just want to do this. It's my passion. I'm going to make this happen one way or another. There's not like an outside arm around the shoulder that's going to help people get to where they need to be. So it's going to be that very committed person who says, I'm going to forge my own way within the world of jazz dance. It would seem that way.
Yeah, that's how you have to start. And
Hmm.
then, try to get the attention and try to get help from, you
Hmm.
know, theaters and the government aid, because they do have
Hmm.
a program where they do give financial aid to companies to choreographical
Hmm.
projects. But
Hmm.
it's not easy for jazz people to get the recognition
Hmm.
necessary to get into that
Yeah.
system, in that circuit.
Well, company work and concert work is always the hardest to get going because of the
Yes,
finances.
it
There's a
is.
little bit more availability in terms of the theatrical sense. Now, I know here in
Yes.
the United States, the
Mm-hmm.
number of university programs that are catering to musical theater performers, of
Mm-hmm.
which dance
Mm-hmm.
is going to be, is just growing and growing and growing. There is such a creation of programs to be
Mm-hmm.
based on that. So in
Interesting.
terms of the opportunities in France.
Mm-hmm.
Are there opportunities to dance in a jazz dance style, but with a theatrical format, whether it be musicals or reviews, things like that?
Well, I don't think there are as many opportunities as there would be in a place like New York City, but
Hmm.
um, I would say that there are more and more musicals being produced in France and put on stage.
Hmm.
I would say about 20 or 30 years back, musicals weren't necessarily considered to be, by the general public. They weren't as popular as they are
Hmm.
now. And now you see uh, uh, Théâtre du Châtelet, a lot of the big are programming musicals, which is giving more opportunity
Hmm.
for jazz dancers to go there and perform and dance. So that's
Hmm.
a good thing.
Hmm.
That's really a good thing.
Yeah.
And there are
Okay.
in some of the centers, and training programs.
Okay. All right. We're having a little transmission problem here because you're breaking up
Okay.
a little bit. So hopefully it's gonna clear up in just a second. Can you tell me now when you say musicals, are they like American musicals or are there French musicals or and people in France who are working on their own in terms of creating
I would
musical theater?
say basically American musicals, but there
I
I've seen a
see.
few creations as well, French
Mm-hmm.
French creations, but
Mm-hmm.
I would say the majority of it is our American musicals.
Mm-hmm.
Mogador, well, last year there was a great production of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. Um, so to go back to the certification and we can wrap this
Yeah.
up. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Is there notoriety for this new not newer, it's been here a while, but certification
Mm-hmm.
process in jazz dance outside of France? In other words, have other countries look to this and say, look at this model that was created before? Has anybody in the United States approached you and said, do you want to come and give a presentation on what your certification process is, because we have an interest possibly, or we just want to know what that is? Or is this something that, no, this is only within France and no one else has shown an interest in it?
Well, I haven't heard anything from anyone in the United States, but there was a time when I was going often to Belgium to teach,
Mm-hmm.
to give pedagogy classes to teachers who were already teaching in the conservatories over there. And they were so jealous. They would say, wow, it's wonderful what you have in France, this program. And I could feel that they would have wished to have that same opportunity in Belgium. Also, we have a lot of students that come from Belgium,
Mm-hmm.
from different countries, to do it here in France, because
Mm-hmm.
they can't find it elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. I think that we need something like that in this country,
Mm,
because jazz, the word jazz is just taken by so many different groups, or
yes,
used in their own need.
that's right.
Whether they're changing what jazz is to be something different
Mm-hmm,
just because they want that cachet of that word. So to have
mm-hmm,
something formal that
mm-hmm.
puts out, no, this is what we're talking about when we say jazz dance, and not
Yes,
not to be, put bookends and be limiting on it, but
right.
at least to get that out and say there is this thing of jazz dance. It's just not whatever we want to name it
That's
today and
right.
whatever that person wants to name it. Things like that
Mm-hmm.
kind of happen, and it really creates such a, we all have such different views on what jazz
Yes,
dance is.
that's right.
I know I can tell
Understand.
somebody that I teach jazz dance, and they immediately, they do Bob Fosse, they do jazz
Yeah,
hands,
yeah,
things like,
yeah.
because that's what they think of it,
Their
or they're
image.
or they're like, ooh, hot stuff, jazz, and
Yeah.
that's what they think of it. So to have
Mm-hmm.
something a little bit more, formalized and of a better evocation of really what jazz can represent, I think
Mm-hmm.
can only be a good thing, right? Can only be a
Well,
good thing.
this is what I think this whole system has done for jazz dance. It's made us look at ourselves and say, what are the fundamentals of this dance?
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, get away from one style or another style. Let's not put styles against each other.
Mm-hmm.
What is fundamental to all the different
Mm-hmm.
styles?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is the relationship with space? How do we use body weight? How do we use energy? How is the time? Time is organized by our musicality.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that's really at the heart of it.
Mm-hmm.
Jazz is music and jazz is dance,
Mm-hmm.
and they shouldn't be separate.
Exactly. So I can see. I was involved with the NDEO. They had a, jazz dance conference in Rhode Island in
Mm,
2016, and mostly
mm,
university people, all talking
okay.
about jazz dance. They had another one this past summer, which I was not able to attend, and I know there was
Mm-hmm,
more information about jazz dance coming out there. I did teach for a group which comes through Dance Teacher Magazine. It was called
mm-hmm,
Dance Teacher Summit.
mm-hmm,
Another big thing, which are all teachers. So as what I'm saying is like that, those would be ideal venues for
mm-hmm,
someone from those venues to invite you or somebody from the certification program to
mm-hmm,
come and talk about it. Because I
mm,
think that people in America would be very interested in hearing, wow,
mm-hmm,
something that's formalized for jazz dance and not whatever. And how would I take that information and maybe use it here? Not
mm-hmm,
that there's going to be a formalized thing, but there's going to
mm-hmm,
be at least
mm-hmm.
interested. Let's keep the level up a little bit as
That's
much as
right.
possible. So hopefully you'll be
Mm.
invited to America
That'd be great.
at some point, and bring your expertise. Okay.
Actually, I'm going to Pittsburgh soon because Pittsburgh
Oh,
Valley Theater is having its 50th anniversary.
wonderful.
And I'm going to go spend
Wonderful.
a weekend. It's crazy
Mm-hmm.
expensive,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
go back and see my old dancer friends from way back when.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds wonderful.
But to get back
Wonderful.
to the subject, you talk about formalizing it. Yes, it just, being aware of identifying the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that gives us freedom, because it doesn't mean we're all dancing the same style, the same form. That's not the point. That's can you use these basic fundamentals to create a diversity in jazz dance.
Mm-hmm.
But can all of it be recognized as jazz dance? You see this today in music, because in jazz music, there's so many different styles at the same time. You know, there's so many different aesthetics in jazz music, but in every single one, something that you hear, whether it be the syncopation, whether it be the phrasing, whether it be the sonority, there's something in there that tells you this is jazz music.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to do the same thing with jazz dance. We have to be proud of our identity.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, that's something, because I know that a lot of times you'll hear about people have to actually pull the name jazz out of their company, because by putting the name jazz in, people have a
Yeah,
certain idea of what it is. And even like
yeah,
Gus
that's too
Giordano's company,
bad.
they pulled the name jazz out of Gus
Yeah,
Giordano's company because of just having a different impression. So, okay, on that
yeah.
note, thank you, Patty, for taking time, giving us your
Thank you,
expertise.
Bob.
And
That was a
I mean,
pleasure.
we have had people watching, but this will also be available as a regular video to watch on my channel. So hopefully we'll have many more people watching this in the future. And so that's it. So
Okay.
good luck with your future work, with your future
Thank
company,
you.
and
Thank
have
you.
fun on your trip back to Pittsburgh.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right.
Talk to you soon then.
Okay. Thank you. I'm
Bye,
going to pull
Bob.
you
Bye,
out for a
everyone.
second.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So that was a wonderful talk with Patty Karagozian about jazz dance and the certification process that's going on in Paris for many years, or in France for many years now. It started back in 1989. I didn't realize it was that long ago, but very good information, and something that I think people here in America certainly need to be talking about in terms of how do we preserve jazz, how do we bring it to its highest level, and make sure that it's represented the way that it should be represented. So again, my name is Bob Boros. This is my Jazz and Tap Dance Life. My video channel. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe and click that notifications bell. So that way you'll always know when we're putting up something new. And also hit the like button. If you hit the like button, the more likes are up there, the more likely it is that YouTube will put this into the rhythm for other people to be able to see as they're looking for information on jazz dance. So that's our broadcast from today. Please keep posted, and we will let you know when the next one is. Okay, great. All right. Thanks so much.